Hello and welcome to Making It Political. I'm Zach.
And I'm Gage.
And we're A-level politics students doing this podcast about politics. Today what we want to talk about is the current British electoral system of first past the post, the fact that this 2024 election has clearly demonstrated the spoiler effect, the sort of scandal going on with reform with the invisible candidates, and then just generally summing up Keir Starmer's first week as Prime Minister. So to kick it off, Gage, I'm going to ask you how you thought first past the post demonstrated any strengths and weaknesses in this election.
Well, I'd say first and foremost, it keeps out not only minor parties but also extremist parties in a way that people probably didn't quite understand, haven't understood properly in the past 2 decades until this kind of level. We've had UKIP and whatnot, but the fact that Reform got more votes than the Lib Dems and got a tiny fraction of the seats, you could argue they're an extreme far-right party or even extremist to an extent. But besides that, it has definitely done that. And I'd say a weakness is it is crazily disproportionate to votes. You don't have to look very far on statistics around the general election to see that. I'd say only the Lib Dems got what they deserved, being 1% out between votes and seats. So they're not going to be complaining about first past the post. It does highlight the issue of voter concentration as well, I think, whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage. Voter concentration is key to benefiting from first past the post. And then I'd say the biggest strength, you've got a huge elective dictatorship that the Labour Party has, and whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, what nobody can deny is it produces a strong and stable government. So I'd say they are the two biggest issues, 2 or 3 biggest issues with first past the post.
Yeah, I can't exactly be upset at the fact that it's kept out Reform. That being said, it's not exactly democratic for people to feel like, because it influences the way people vote. I don't think it's democratic for people to think they shouldn't vote for the minor parties, as it would be a wasted vote, and they should only vote Labour, Conservative, or in this election Lib Dem, Reform. Like, for example, the Greens, whilst they gain seats, they're quite limited by first past the post, and I just think that's not particularly democratic. That said, it has delivered a clear, strong government. They can effectively do whatever they want unimpeded. Whether or not that's going to be good or bad is left for the future to see. But we definitely won't end up with any coalition disagreements that were seen in 2010 to 2015, and nothing. It keeps away sort of the situation Germany was in during the Weimar Republic, where you had such a broad range of parties trying to work together and be an effective government. So I suppose that is a strength, but objectively, I can't help but feel that it's not really serving its purpose of creating a government that the people have voted for, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I suppose another issue with first past the post is it does protect the 2 main parties, being the Conservative and Labour Party, in that it gives rise to tactical voting and also just pure wasted votes, not to mention it's probably partly the reason why there's such low turnout. It's one of the factors for sure. And then I suppose the alternate argument for that is, well, if you look at other countries with multi-party systems, because they don't have first past the post, are they as strong and stable in government? I mean, if you look at, I hate to say it, but Northern Ireland, you look at France after their parliamentary elections, National Assembly elections, where they are in a situation where parties have used strategies to keep out the far right, and it has resulted in a a tri-party system where none of them are going to work together, being the centre, the far right and the far left. Do we really want to be in that situation where we don't have that strong and stable government to legislate and make decisions? And I mean, what's the point of democracy if you've got no one to lead the democracy? So I suppose that is something I have picked up on looking at Stormont and the National Assembly elections in France. But yeah.
I suppose I can't argue with like results, but at the same time, it has delivered clear, strong government. But you know, when you look at how it works, Labour got a 34% vote share, I want to say off the top of my head. So
that's right.
I'm not very good at maths, but that's a hang on,
calculator comes out.
Yeah, that's 66% of people voting that did not vote for Labour. And again, 40% of people didn't even vote in this election.
I think I read somewhere that if we're using a percent of a percent, so 34% of a 60% turnout equates to roughly just under 20% of the UK population. Now, as much as I want to defend first past the post, there is absolutely no denying that 20% of the vote resulting in what the fate of this country is totally undemocratic, disproportionate, illegitimate. I mean, it is a crazy number. The fact that they got even less votes than 2017 and 2019 Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party because of the low turnout. And yeah, it's just completely undemocratic. We've got democracy crumbling because of first past the post and because of the falling turnout. So, yeah,
exactly. Which, when you look at trends, we had the lowest turnout ever in like modern history in 2001, and then it steadily rose, I believe, up until 2019, where that was the Brexit referendum. People were voting based on issues. So I suppose the question is, are there any substantial issues that people would have wanted to vote for this time outside of, well, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we might have seen potentially the increase in voter turnout because of Brexit. I mean, it really was like the World Cup final going on and on and on over here. But I would have thought that the turnout would have actually stayed the same or increased, because you've got a government that's probably not seen a level of hatred since Margaret Thatcher's poll tax policy. And that says something, like the John Major kind of government as well. You would have thought that if people wanted change, the Labour Party vote would have shot up. But in fact, it seems that, yes, lots of Conservative voters and some Labour voters won't have turned out because they knew the result was going to be a Labour victory anyway. But in a way, I mean, you're just losing your voice again. And if that turnout goes lower and lower, you're losing that accountancy that the government has. You know, how can the government have accountability when they've not been democratically elected, like to a full extent? So the winner takes it all. Is it really fit for purpose in modern Britain?
It isn't.
Yeah, in terms of democracy, it's not very fit for purpose. But if we're talking in terms of purpose, effective, you also can't argue that it's ineffective, because as undemocratic as it is, we have got strong and stable government almost consistently throughout the decades. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose Nigel Farage was trying to argue this was the immigration election, which it really wasn't. It's nowhere near the same level as high priority as Brexit was. And then the only other influential factors were literally people wanted to get rid of the Tory government, and as we saw in some of the constituencies where independents stood, people would vote based on their views of Palestine and such like. So it's interesting. This has been more of a minor factor sort of voting behaviour, which I think is really interesting because, yeah, especially when you think how many people have been complaining about the government since Partygate, you'd think more people would want to get rid of them. And also, I might add, after seeing this government, I'm not going to hear any slander against John Major.
Just talk to your grandparents about John Major. Yeah, I agree with you on the fact that it's not an immigration election at all. As much as people like to put immigration on their priorities list, a lot of people have realised that nowadays immigration isn't necessarily as big as an issue as, I mean, you've got people like a housing crisis, an inflation crisis, just crisis left, right, and centre where nobody can afford anything. You've got disposable income decreasing every single year, and people just have bigger priorities, I'm afraid. But yeah, I don't think it's the immigration election at all. Like, he's a populist, so of course he's going to say that. It's not unsurprising to me at all that he would do this, being, well, the former UKIP leader and now Reform. I mean, he's a populist. That's what he does. So, yeah.
Well, I suppose whilst we're vaguely on the topic of Reform and also how I mentioned the independent candidates earlier, now is the best time to segue into what this election really demonstrated, which was the spoiler effect in action. So I'll let you handle the effect of the independent candidates.
Oh, lucky me. Well, you mentioned Palestine. I called it the Palestine problem, but Palestine penalty will work just fine. We have seen that it has cost Labour seats, that they have not taken any chances. They've been ultra safe, and instead of risking more seats, they've just decided to replace candidates that might stir the pot, you might say. And that has led to the rise of many independents, as well as also people like Jeremy Corbyn being kicked out of the Labour Party, well, having his whip removed, sorry. And yeah, it has cost Labour many, many seats, whether that's been losing them to the independents directly or through the spoiler effect, as we've seen with Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, who, despite losing 20 points, a 20-point lead, he still managed to win that seat.
In that constituency, wasn't it a Labour candidate, and then the independent though was a Labour candidate that was deselected, or am I thinking of a different constituency?
I think you might be right. There was one particularly where I think her name was Faiza Shaheen, and she got just as many votes pretty much as the Labour candidate. And yeah, that led to, if the vote had not been split, I'm absolutely certain that would have been a Labour seat. That has shown its reared its ugly head in South Leicestershire, I think, or East Leicester, London, and some other cities as well. Because some areas obviously have a high Muslim community. So, yeah. Palestine problem, it's hard to say, considering it's such a new thing, to say what the impacts will be. But I reckon it's probably something that will not be much of a major problem going ahead. more of just another pointer to what the spoiler effect is. And if we dig deeper into the spoiler effect, I mean, you look at reform, this is the spoiler general election, isn't it? That is what it's going to be remembered for. The fact that depending on, we can never know what those reform voters, the people who vote reform, were going to vote if there was not a reform party. Were they going to vote Lib Dem, maybe, or just not vote at all, even vote Labour? Anything but the Tories was the attitude, and that's why people have voted reform. So it's hard to say whether the Conservatives would have benefited much from reform not being there. The only one that's been helped out, I would argue personally, a bit of a hot take, is reform itself. They are the only ones who have benefited. They are the ones that have set the platform for saying that this is disproportionate. So, yeah, if there's one thing I can say that Nigel Farage has done well, it is mess with the attitudes towards electoral system in the UK.
I suppose he has messed with it a bit, but I suppose an important thing to consider is what is the longevity of the Reform Party? Like, Nigel came in out of nowhere, and just decided last minute he was going to stand for Clacton. There's already been sort of a reshuffle, because it's a company as well, isn't it, Reform? So there's some of the roles of, one of the roles has already been reshuffled. Yeah. But it is interesting because we see Reform as more of a further right party. So we would assume it's attracted some more of the further right voters of the Conservative Party and split their vote. But you can't really say how many Labour or Lib Dem voters it's won over, especially when you have to consider tactical voting. So how many people in possible swing to Lib Dem constituencies voted Reform instead? Reform's sort of the hot new thing this election, isn't it? It's sort of like the underdog, it's coming at the last minute, just completely stole some votes, coming in second or third in some constituencies. It is interesting, but I don't think it's going to last that long in its current state. I think Nigel Farage is going to get pretty bored being in Parliament, especially since he's not going to have as many opportunities to speak and ask questions as he probably thinks he is. And without him, what really is the Reform Party? Because that's why most people voted for it, because he's the leader.
In terms of the longevity of the Reform Party, I'd say we have to wait to see what happens with the Conservative leadership election, because I'm not going to rule out the possibility, in my mind, of a 1993 Canadian-style Reform and Conservative Party merging. Some Conservative MPs will probably like Nigel Farage as the leader, particularly those on the far right. However, I do not, at the current minute, see Reform doing a lot. I mean, I feel as though it's just the same as the UKIP vote was in 2015. And that will eventually fizzle out, I think, or at least not grow particularly much. I think they achieved most of the far right. I think that number gave us that number showed how many far right voters there were this time around. I don't see it lasting. I hate to say it, but whether this is personal or not, Nigel Farage is a slime ball, kind of snake figure. He's quite snaky. He says he's not doing something, he does it. He says he'll never become Conservative leader, but I reckon he wants to be. He wants he's been trying for election after election to get into power. I don't know if that screams power hungry to anyone else, but I think he's just playing it and playing the system until eventually he gains enough influence to eventually run one of a major party in the Conservative Party, or in that of Conservative Party. And there's a recent interview about that.
Yeah. Someone recently in some sort of interview show, I can't remember what it was, someone said to him, would you ever join the Conservative Party? He said no. But he was also asked if he would ever lead it, and he said if something like that was going to happen, I would take it over. I don't
Yeah,
know.
he also said in the one when he asked if he'd ever that he wouldn't rule it out being the Conservative leader. He said, no, not in the current state. That just screams it. If he's a politician, rarely ever tells the truth. But if anyone is speaking his mind, it is Nigel Farage. If he says, no, not in the current state, that means he is intending on doing it at some point. He is Nigel Farage. Let's not forget that. And he will do anything. He will grease out his own party just to get in charge of another larger one. So yeah, that's how I feel Nigel Farage will play it. I think he's power hungry. He is obsessed almost. And yes, I like the term that he's bored. he was bored up until 1990 when he decided he was going to stand against the thing that ERM, the European Rate Mechanism, or something like that. And after Brexit, he realised, oh wait, that was a disaster, and now that it's over, I don't have any purpose in life. And now he's running for MP, screwing with the electoral system. The attitudes towards it anyway. So yeah, I think he's power hungry, and his eyes are set on that Conservative leadership.
Well, whilst we're on the subject of the current state of the Conservative Party, I want to get your thoughts on Rishi Sunak now that he's opposition leader, because I think he's become so much better as opposition leader than he ever was as Prime Minister. He's so much more courteous. He's a lot nicer, a bit less tetchy. So I just sort of wonder if maybe his behaviour as Prime Minister was that he's come into this, frankly, in shambles government after Liz Truss, and it's just sort of been stress for him to try and manage it. And now that he's opposition, he's sort of free.
Yeah, he's been squeezed from the left, the right, the centre. The Conservative Party didn't really have a place in this generally. The kind of moderate right. He's been squeezed and robbed, and quite frankly put in a disastrous position leading a government to the point where I'd say it's a sort of James Callaghan style position where you've been put in charge of a mess. You've been given a toothbrush to clean the carpet with. He had no chance, really. Realistically, from the start, he had no chance. Now the stress and the weight is off his shoulders. Maybe we get to see what he would be like if he had the opportunity. Because at the end of the day, he's a politician. He was interested in politics because he wants his ideology put into play because he thinks that is the best way to run the country. So, I mean, it's too early to say what he's like because, it's been a week. So,
true.
Yeah,
but
I understand by saying he was more courteous, but then again, they don't have anything to criticise, scrutinise the Labour government, considering, they haven't done anything yet. I
wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, they're getting started, we'll say that. But in terms of a parliamentary term, they've not done anything. So, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Well, over the course of the election campaign, there were sort of three defining moments, one of which, I suppose maybe two, were technically scandals, D-Day and the betting scandal. So let's talk about a bit of a scandal outside of the Conservatives for once. Let's talk about, once again, reform, which I know we're sort of adding to the problem we talked about in the last episode of reform getting much more coverage than the other parties. But let's talk about the invisible candidates. So, yeah, for those of you who don't know, the invisible candidate situation is essentially in constituencies, Reform have put these names forward, and there's sort of no evidence of these people existing, at least anywhere near that constituency. And some of the posters or garden stakes or whatever looked like the people looked like they were AI generated. And
that one guy who looked like AI.
Oh, bloody hell. Exactly. So yeah, there have been 60 of these candidates identified. One of them has come forward and said he is real, and the reason that picture of him looked AI generated was because there was no time for a photo shoot of him properly. Which sort of begs the question of how last minute these candidates were picked. But what are your thoughts on it, Gage?
I don't know the rules surrounding that, but I'd imagine it's some kind of fraud. Or at least, I mean, could you argue it's identity theft to say they didn't exist in the first place? I don't know the law. You're the law guy. But yeah, I mean, I think I read somewhere it's up to 60 of the candidates, or like 50 odd, that are potentially non-existent. And if that's the case, I think if that shows anything, it shows that people really did vote for Nigel. It's Nigel Farage's party. We might as well change it to Farage UK, you know? Well, so, yeah. In terms of the invisible candidates, I mean, it would make sense, I think, because Nigel Farage, when he took over Reform, obviously it's quite early on into the campaign, the Reform Party had to find plenty more candidates in that short time. And it is very difficult to find people that are willing to do that. So I suppose it would make sense if that was the case. But I reckon a cheeky independent investigation would be quite handy. What do you think?
Well, in terms of it being illegal or not, the Electoral Commission, once they found out about it, did say that if it's proven to be true, then it is a police matter, which I assume the logic behind that is it's technically sort of tampering with the election, because if there are no candidates, they're essentially just
that is
taking votes.
That sounds like fraud to me, but I don't know the law very well. Definitely.
There's no precedent on it because it's never really happened. So, yeah, but it would be a police matter.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, I think.
But yeah, there's not really much to say about it, I guess, outside of the fact that, Oh, there's another issue, though, with, like, some of their candidates living, like, yoinks away from the constituency.
Yeah.
Like, the Chesterfield one lives somewhere that's not Chesterfield. I can't remember where. It began with an E or something.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of another issue. People voting based on that MP rather than like what that means for the country. So I'd use my example, Lee Rowley in North East Derbyshire. He got he lost his seat at the general election, and I think, I could be wrong, I think the woman that won the election, the Labour candidate, is from Leicester, and Lee Rowley is a local boy. That was his big thing. It was, well, I'm local, I've done this, I've done that, and I'd say hats off to him. He's done a good job. But people were really that desperate to get the Conservatives out that they would vote for someone that's from Leicester, 50 miles up the road, over a relatively, I'll say, considering I live here, that he's done a relatively good job in North East Derbyshire. He's done nothing wrong, I don't think. He's very close to his constituents. And I think that might actually be a trend over the years. I feel as though, I reckon, I'm making assumptions here by saying that if I asked my grandparents, like, how many people would vote based off of, like, if they would they realistically vote for a candidate that's not local? If I asked them from when they were younger, I'm guessing they would probably say no. You vote for someone that's local and understands the issues. And I think people have I don't want to say people have become more naive, but I'll say they're less politically interested now. And yeah, it's just, I feel as though the kind of the local feature of politics has kind of been lost or drowned out by nationwide politics. So yeah, that's just a side thought.
Yeah, well, I suppose the issue with Lee Rowley is that, whilst he might have been good for his constituency, he did vote along the party line with the last Conservative government on some policies that were, quite frankly, pretty damaging for constituencies over the whole country. So I suppose there's always that to consider. Moving on, though, from, reform scandals, overall, like, systematic issues, let's talk about Labour's first week in government. I know it's pretty early, but I would, I'd like to take back a statement I made in the last episode when I said I didn't think Keir Starmer had the quality to be a presidential prime minister. I think he does, after seeing his speeches. I think he's definitely got that sort of statesman
he's got
about him.
I think he's got that fearless kind of face. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
He's definitely got that statesman factor about him. But I do back what I said about him. He's appointed this cabinet. He's going to use it, and he has said that his door is open to anyone from any party that has like good ideas for the country. So, sort of what I've picked up on over this first week are James Timpson as Secretary for Prisons. That has some interesting implications. Some sort of sentencing guideline reforms, because I think he said there are many situations where a community order would be much better than a custodial sentence, so sending people to prison. And the prisons are overcrowded anyway. So, yeah. The Labour have lifted the ban on onshore wind farms, which is, in my opinion, good. I suppose the only argument against it was visual pollution and possibly bird kill.
I think in the situation we've got with cost of living, it makes sense to be. I hate to say like a neoliberal here, but deregulating. I mean, I feel as though no matter what government is in charge, they do not have a choice over, kind of the housing crisis. They have to deregulate. They have to make reforms because there will be a reason that not enough houses are being built, and if that's because of greenbelt areas or regulations, things that slow the process down. This is a national issue. They need to put politics aside, because some would argue that the cost of living crisis is an emergency. There are more people in poverty now with the highest tax burden since the Second World War. There has to be change. So I think what you're saying with the onshore wind farms being lifted, that ban being lifted, I think anything at that point to reduce costs is absolutely necessary to getting economic growth back in the economy to a higher level than what we see at the minute. But yeah, go on.
Well, exactly. I am more fascinated by like what James Timpson is going to mean for prisons, because
I don't know much about him, so you're gonna have to fill me in.
Well, he employs a lot of ex-convicts, which is always good to give them jobs. Which also having jobs makes them less likely to reoffend. And he has some interesting data on like reoffending statistics, sort of the ages, the age cut off from between genders of when they're more likely to reoffend, which is interesting. In terms of the prison sort of crisis that's going on right now, we currently have out of necessity, we've got a bit of a one in, one out system where some people whose sentences are nearly up are being let out early in exchange for people coming in, because there's not enough room in the prisons, and some of the prisons are unsafe because they've been around for donkey's years, and there's just not enough room because we're sending so many people to prison. Sending them to prison, we're forgetting about them. So I think what he's going to bring in is some reforms to sentencing guidelines, sort of, and maybe some changes to sort of community orders to make it more feasible to give more people community orders. And a community order is where you get like maybe them doing unpaid work for the community, setting curfews so they're not allowed to go to places at certain times when they're most likely to reoffend, sort of things like that, and having to check in with the police on a regular basis. I do think that would work much better, because whilst we are supposed to punish people in prisons, you know, the whole eye for an eye theory that's been around for centuries, really, let's not forget there are other factors at play here, such as rehabilitation. There's also deterrence, which hasn't really worked, where like the idea is that sending someone to prison is supposed to deter them from doing a crime again, and it's also supposed to deter the public, because they say, if I do that, I'll end up like them. But that hasn't really worked, because, you know, when people get out of prison, unfortunately, the way it is their opportunities are limited, and so some people feel the need to reoffend again, and they end up back in prison over and over and over. So it's not really acting as a deterrent. In terms of rehabilitation, some prisons are pretty good at offering like education inside prisons that give people the skills to go back out into the real world, the ordinary citizen. But I think it's going back to politics and away from law. It's going to be interesting to watch the space, I think, whether we're going to spend money building more prisons or if we're going to give out different sentences, such as community orders, or maybe there'll be more fines. I don't think there'll going to be more discharges, because that's more self-defense related stuff. But yeah, we could see more fines, more community orders, rather than sending people to prison. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I went on quite the tangent there.
I'll keep this one short as we come towards our kind of conclusions for this episode. But I personally think I do not want to see another set of short-term policies that will lead to even worse issues down the line. We've seen what Margaret Thatcher, John Major, and Tony Blair did with the lack of houses. A lot of problems have emerged from short-term policies of a decade of growth and then 2 decades of hell. And nobody in this country wants to see that. What we need to do now is, while it is still just about bearable and at the breaking point, we need a long-term plan that we can go through the storm knowing that something is on the other side. Hope is everything in economics, whatever it is, right? Hope has to be on the other side of that storm, and we're in the storm. We can't deny it. We can't blow smoke up our backsides. We just need to get on with it, get through the storm, see what's on the other side. And I think we need I personally think we need a long-term plan to sort out the issue. We do not want to be letting rapists out early. We do not want to be letting murderers out early. What we need to do is get us out of the cost of living crisis and start setting a precedent that removes all crime to a large extent. We need something long term. Don't want an NHS or housing crisis issue. But yeah, sorry, personal thoughts.
Yeah, there has been talk of in terms of prevention of crime, the sort of reintroduction. I don't really know why this sort of ended, but the reintroduction of local police, or like, I guess the term for it is beat cops. So they, on the same route every day, they get to know the community. People see them as a figure they can trust. And I think that would be quite effective in sort of specifically preventing youth crime, so knife crime.
I think that would also benefit the fact that the national, the kind of county-wide constabularies sort of being distrusted, particularly by women, to being ineffective, and also the lack of authority within their systems, and some people waiting weeks. I mean, Christ, if I was a woman, I definitely wouldn't be trusting the police for anything because of all the violence, the sexual violence that happens against them. There needs to be changes, and when Keir Starmer promises changes, I'm hoping that he really means it. But yeah, we should head towards our conclusions now.
We should head towards our conclusions. I do want to say before we get there, he does keep talking about a long-term plan, and you know how we can't keep focusing on these short-term solutions, which I agree with. I just hope that maybe we get to the end of the 5 years, and I hope that he does have a plan beyond these first steps. I believe he does, but I hope we're not going to get these first steps for change done, and then maybe it's time for the 2029 election, and someone else gets in, and we don't get to see where this was going. So I think it sounds the future sounds promising under this Keir Starmer Labour government, but we'll just have to wait and see for more than 1 week. Things to take away from this episode then. First past the post. It may or may not be fit for purpose.
Depending on how you view it. AI got ghost candidates for reform.
Spoiler election, Palestine penalty,
local effects. There's plenty. But yeah.
Well, thank you all for listening. I've been Zach, and this has been Gage.
I'd hope you're still Zach.
Well, maybe not next time. We'll see. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next time.